The sun was just beginning to rise over London when Prince William opened his eyes. Something felt different about this Tuesday morning. He could hear the gentle sounds of his wife Kate moving around downstairs in the kitchen. The smell of fresh coffee and toast was floating up to their bedroom. William stretched and looked at the clock. It was 6:30 in the morning. Kate was already dressed in simple jeans and a warm sweater. She was not wearing any of her usual elegant dresses or formal clothes. Instead, she looked like any ordinary mother getting ready for a day with her family. She was cutting sandwiches and packing them into a simple lunch bag. Her hair was pulled back in a casual ponytail, and she was humming softly to herself. William came downstairs and found Kate standing by the kitchen window. She was looking out at the garden where their 3 children often played. The morning light was making her face glow with a peaceful happiness. When she heard his footsteps, she turned around and smiled at him. It was the kind of smile that made William remember why he fell in love with her all those years ago. "Good morning, my love," Kate said as she poured him a cup of coffee. "Are you still sure about what we planned for today?" William took the warm cup in his hands and nodded. "Yes," he said. "I think this is exactly what our family needs right now, and I think it's what the people need too." For weeks, William and Kate had been talking about doing something different. They were tired of the endless formal events and ceremonial duties. They wanted to show their children what real service meant. Not the kind where you shake hands and give speeches, but the kind where you get your hands dirty and your heart involved. Kate had been reading letters from people all across Britain. Many of them were struggling with difficult times. Some had lost their jobs. Others were dealing with illness in their families. Many were just lonely and needed to know that someone cared about them. These letters had touched her heart deeply. She wanted to do more than just read them and feel sad. She wanted to take action. William had been feeling the same way. He remembered how his mother, Princess Diana, used to take him to visit hospitals and shelters when he was young. Those visits had taught him that being royal was not about living in palaces and wearing crowns. It was about using your position to help others and make their lives a little bit better. The night before they had sat together after putting the children to bed, they had made a decision that would surprise everyone, including their royal advisors. Instead of following their usual schedule of formal appearances, they would spend the day visiting real people in real places where help was needed. Kate finished packing the sandwiches and looked at William. "Do you think the children will understand?" she asked. William smiled and put his arm around her shoulders. "I think they will understand better than we expect," he said. "Children have a natural way of caring for others. We just need to give them the chance to show it." Upstairs, they could hear the sounds of their 3 children starting to wake up. Prince George, who was 10 years old, was probably already awake and reading one of his adventure books. Princess Charlotte, who was 8, was likely choosing what clothes to wear. And little Prince Louis, who was 5, was probably still snuggled under his blankets wishing he could sleep for another hour. William and Kate looked at each other with excitement and a little bit of nervousness. They knew that today would be different from any other day in their royal lives. They were not going to be appearing as the formal Prince and Princess of Wales. Today they were going to be simply a family who wanted to help other families. Kate picked up the lunch bag and checked that she had packed enough sandwiches for everyone. She had also packed some small gifts for the children they would meet. Simple things like coloring books and small toys. Nothing expensive or fancy, just the kind of things that would make a child smile. William was already thinking about their first stop. They would visit a children's hospital where Kate had been quietly volunteering for months. Then they would go to a community garden where local families grew food for their neighbors. Their last stop would be a shelter for families who had nowhere else to go. The morning light was getting brighter, and they could hear more sounds from upstairs. Soon their children would come running down for breakfast. And then their adventure would begin. An adventure that would change not just their day, but the way they thought about what it really meant to serve others with love and kindness. The first sounds of little feet running down the wooden stairs filled the house with energy. Prince Louis was the first one to appear in the kitchen doorway. His brown hair was messy from sleep, and he was still wearing his favorite dinosaur pajamas. He rubbed his sleepy eyes and looked around the kitchen with confusion. "Mummy, why are you wearing those clothes?" he asked, as he noticed Kate was not dressed in her usual smart outfits. Kate knelt down to his level and gave him a warm hug. "We are going on a very special adventure today," she said with a gentle smile. Louis' eyes grew wide with excitement, even though he was not fully awake yet. Princess Charlotte came down next wearing a pretty pink dress that she had chosen all by herself. Her long hair was slightly tangled, but her bright blue eyes were already full of curiosity. She looked at her parents and tilted her head to one side. "Where are we going today?" she asked in her clear young voice. "Are we going to another boring grown-up meeting?" William laughed softly at his daughter's honest question. "No, Charlotte," he said. "Today we are going to visit some very special people who need our help and friendship." Charlotte's face immediately lit up with interest. She loved meeting new people and making friends wherever she went. Prince George was the last to come downstairs. At 10 years old, he was more aware of his family royal duties than his younger siblings. He was already dressed neatly in casual clothes, as if he somehow knew today would be different. He sat down at the breakfast table and looked carefully at his parents' faces. "Something is different about today," George said thoughtfully. "You both look excited, but also a little nervous. What are we really doing today?" William was impressed by his oldest son's ability to read the situation so well. George had always been very observant and smart for his age. Kate served breakfast to all 3 children while William explained their plans. "We are going to visit a hospital where there are children who have been sick for a long time," he said. "Then we will go to a garden where families grow food to share with their neighbors. And after that, we will meet some families who need extra help and support right now." Charlotte clapped her hands together with joy. "Can I bring some of my toys to share?" she asked. "And can I draw pictures for the sick children?" Kate smiled at her daughter's kind heart. "Yes, sweetie," she said. "We can bring some small gifts to share with everyone we meet." Louis was still trying to understand what was happening, but he could feel the excitement in the room. "Will there be other children to play with?" he asked hopefully. William nodded and ruffled his youngest son's messy hair. "Yes, buddy, there will be lots of children for you to meet and play with." George was quiet for a moment as he ate his toast. Then he looked up at his parents with serious eyes. "Are we going to help people who are sad?" he asked. William was touched by his son's understanding. "Some of the people we meet might be going through difficult times," he explained. "But our job is to bring them happiness and show them that we care about them." The 3 children finished their breakfast quickly. They were all eager to start their adventure. Kate had prepared simple snacks and drinks for them to take along. She also gathered some small gifts, including coloring books, crayons, small toys, and homemade cookies that she had baked the night before. Charlotte ran upstairs to get her favorite stuffed animal to give away. George carefully chose a book from his collection that he thought another child might enjoy reading. Louis picked out some of his toy cars because he believed sharing toys was the best way to make new friends. When they all came back downstairs, William and Kate looked at their children with pride. Without any pushing or forcing, the children had naturally wanted to give away their own special things to help others. This showed their parents that they were raising children with truly caring hearts. The family walked outside to their car. Instead of the usual formal royal vehicles, they were taking a regular family car for their journey. The children were thrilled about this change. It made them feel like they were going on a secret mission together. As they got into the car, Charlotte asked one more question. "Will the people we meet today remember us forever?" Kate looked back at her daughter through the mirror and smiled. "I think we will all remember each other for a very long time," she said. "Because when people share kindness with each other, it creates memories that last forever." The car pulled up outside Street, Mary's Children's Hospital, at exactly 9 o'clock in the morning. The building was not very big, but it was painted in bright, cheerful colors that made it look welcoming and friendly. William parked the car in a regular parking space, just like any other family visiting the hospital. The children pressed their faces against the car windows to get a better look at their first destination. Kate had been coming to this hospital quietly for several months. She had been reading stories to sick children and helping the nurses with simple tasks. But today was different because she was bringing her own children to meet the young patients. She felt both excited and nervous about how this visit would go. A kind nurse named Sarah met them at the main entrance. She had been working at the hospital for 15 years and had seen many important visitors come and go. But she had never seen a royal family arrive so casually and naturally. The children were carrying their small bags of gifts and looking around with wide, curious eyes. "We are so happy you came today," Sarah said with a warm smile. "The children have been talking about your visit all morning. Some of them have been sick for a very long time, and they really need something special to make them smile." Kate squeezed Sarah's hand gently. "We are the ones who are honored to be here," she said quietly. The first room they entered was the playroom, where several children were sitting at small tables. Some were drawing pictures while others were playing with toys. A few children were connected to medical machines, but they were still laughing and talking with each other. When the royal family walked in, the room became very quiet for a moment. Then a little girl with no hair looked up from her coloring book and waved shyly. Princess Charlotte immediately walked over to her and said hello in her friendly voice. "What are you drawing?" she asked as she sat down in the chair next to the girl. The little girl smiled and showed Charlotte her picture of a rainbow with lots of bright colors. Meanwhile, Prince George noticed a boy about his age sitting alone in the corner. The boy looked sad and was not playing with any of the toys around him. George walked over carefully and sat down beside him. He said gently, "My name is George. What's your name?" The boy looked up with surprise and whispered that his name was Tommy. George reached into his bag and pulled out the adventure book he had brought from home. "Would you like me to read this to you?" he asked. Tommy's eyes lit up with interest and he nodded eagerly. George opened the book and began reading in a clear voice that made other children gather around to listen too. Prince Louis was having his own adventure in the room. He had found a group of younger children who were playing with building blocks. Without any shyness at all, Louis sat down on the floor and started helping them build a tall tower. His infectious giggle soon had all the little ones laughing and clapping their hands with joy. William and Kate watched their children with amazement. They had worried that the hospital setting might be too serious or scary for George, Charlotte, and Louis. But instead, their children had naturally found ways to connect with the patients and bring happiness to the room. A young patient named Amy, who was about 8 years old, came up to Kate with a small handmade card. She had drawn a picture of a family holding hands under a bright sun. "For you," she said shyly as she handed the card to Kate. Kate knelt down and hugged Amy gently. "This is the most beautiful card I have ever received," she said with tears in her eyes. The nurses were watching everything with wonder. They had seen many celebrities and important people visit the hospital over the years, but they had never seen visitors who seemed so genuinely interested in each individual child. The royal family was not just making a quick appearance for photos. They were really spending time and creating real connections. Sarah, the head nurse, later told her colleagues that she had never seen the children so happy and excited. The royal family had brought something special to the hospital that day. It was not just the gifts or the attention. It was the feeling that someone truly cared about each child as an individual person with their own story and dreams. As the morning continued, more children joined the group in the playroom. Some came in wheelchairs while others walked slowly with the help of nurses. But every child who entered the room was greeted with warm smiles and genuine interest from the royal family. The room was filled with laughter and joy in a way that made everyone forget about illness and sadness for a while. In the quieter corner of the hospital playroom sat a little girl who had been watching everything from a distance. Her name was Emma, and she was 7 years old. She had been in the hospital for 3 weeks now, and her parents could only visit her on weekends because they lived far away and had to work during the week. Emma felt very lonely most of the time. Emma had curly red hair and bright green eyes, but she looked much smaller than other children her age. She was wearing a hospital gown with little flowers on it, and she had a collection of drawings spread out on the table in front of her. She was too shy to join the other children who were playing with the royal family. Princess Charlotte noticed Emma sitting by herself and felt something special in her heart. Charlotte had always been good at knowing when someone needed a friend. She walked over to Emma's table very slowly so she would not scare the shy little girl. "Hello, Emma," said Charlotte with her sweetest smile. "I love your drawings. Can you tell me about them?" Emma looked up with surprise. She had not expected anyone to notice her artwork. Her face turned a little pink, but she smiled back at Charlotte. "This one is my house," Emma said, pointing to a drawing of a small cottage with a garden full of flowers. "And this one is my dog Buddy, who is waiting for me to come home." Charlotte sat down in the chair next to Emma and looked at each drawing carefully. She could see that Emma was a very talented artist. "You draw much better than I do," Charlotte said honestly. "I wish I could make flowers look as pretty as yours." Emma felt proud and happy to hear such kind words. No one had praised her drawings in a long time. "Would you like me to teach you how to draw flowers like these?" Emma asked quietly. Charlotte nodded eagerly, and Emma got out a fresh piece of paper. She showed Charlotte how to make the petals of a daisy and how to color them with gentle strokes. Charlotte tried her best to copy Emma's technique, but her flowers looked quite different. Both girls started giggling at Charlotte's funny-looking daisies. As they drew together, Emma began to feel comfortable enough to talk about her life. She told Charlotte about her home in the countryside where she lived with her parents and her golden retriever Buddy. She explained that she had been sick for a while, and the doctors were working hard to help her get better. Charlotte listened to every word with genuine interest. She told Emma about her own life at home with her brothers and parents. She described their big garden and how she loved to pick flowers there. Emma was amazed to learn that even a princess sometimes felt lonely or scared, just like she did. The two girls discovered they both loved the same books and both dreamed of having tea parties in beautiful gardens. Emma showed Charlotte her favorite book about a brave little mouse who went on adventures. Charlotte promised to ask her parents to find the same book so they could read it together. When it was time for the royal family to leave, Emma felt sad, but also happy. She had made a real friend for the first time in weeks. Charlotte took off her favorite bracelet, which had small pink flowers on it, and gave it to Emma. "This is so you will remember our friendship," she said. Emma reached into her small bag and pulled out a handmade bracelet she had been working on during her long days in the hospital. It was made of colorful beads that she had arranged in a beautiful pattern. "I want you to have this," she said as she put it on Charlotte's wrist. Kate and William watched this exchange with tears in their eyes. They saw their daughter learning one of life's most important lessons. True friendship had nothing to do with where someone lived or what they owned. It was about caring for each other and sharing kindness from the heart. Charlotte hugged Emma gently and promised to write her letters while she was still in the hospital. Emma promised to draw pictures to send back to Charlotte. The two girls had formed a bond that would last long after this special day was over. As the royal family prepared to leave the hospital, Emma called out to Charlotte one more time. "Thank you for being my friend," she said with a bright smile. Charlotte waved back and said, "Thank you for teaching me how to draw such beautiful flowers. I will never forget you, Emma." The nurses who had been watching told each other later that they had witnessed something truly magical. Two little girls from completely different worlds had found each other and created a friendship that proved love and kindness could happen anywhere at any time. After leaving the hospital, the royal family drove through the busy streets of London to reach their second destination. The Sunshine Community Garden was located in a neighborhood where many families did not have much money, but they had big hearts and strong spirits. The garden was started by local people who wanted to grow fresh vegetables to share with their neighbors who needed food. When their car arrived at the garden, William and Kate could see about 20 people working among the plants. There were elderly grandparents teaching young children how to plant seeds. There were mothers with babies strapped to their backs pulling weeds from the vegetable rows. There were teenagers helping to carry heavy watering cans and bags of soil. The garden was not very fancy, but it was full of life and color. There were rows of tomatoes, carrots, lettuce, and beans growing in neat lines. Sunflowers taller than the children were growing along one fence. There was a small shed where tools were kept and a picnic table where people could rest and share meals together. An elderly man with gray hair and kind eyes walked over to greet them. His name was Mr. Peterson, and he was 75 years old. He had started this garden 3 years ago when he noticed that many families in his neighborhood could not afford fresh vegetables from the stores. His hands were dirty from working in the soil, but his smile was bright and welcoming. "Welcome to our little piece of heaven," Mr. Peterson said as he shook hands with William and Kate. "We heard you might be coming, but we could hardly believe it was true. We are just ordinary people trying to help our neighbors." Kate smiled warmly at the humble man. "This garden is extraordinary," she said. "You are doing something wonderful for your community." The three royal children looked around with wide eyes at all the plants growing in the garden. They had never seen vegetables growing in the ground before. At home, their food came from the kitchen already prepared. Louis pointed at a large orange pumpkin and asked if it was real. George was fascinated by the tall corn plants that were much taller than he was. A girl about Charlotte's age came running over with dirt on her hands and a big smile on her face. Her name was Maria, and her family was from Spain. They had moved to London 2 years ago, and Maria's mother worked 2 jobs to support their family. Maria loved spending time in the garden because it reminded her of her grandmother's farm back in Spain. "Do you want to help me plant these bean seeds?" Maria asked Charlotte excitedly. Charlotte had never planted anything before, but she was eager to try. Maria showed her how to make small holes in the soil with her finger and then drop the seeds inside. Charlotte was amazed at how simple it was, but also how important each small seed could be. Meanwhile, George had joined a group of boys who were learning how to properly water the plants. An older boy named David was teaching him that too much water could hurt the plants just like too little water could. George listened carefully and tried to water the tomato plants exactly the way David showed him. He felt proud when David said he was doing a good job. Prince Louis had found his own special job in the garden. He was helping a grandmother named Mrs. Chen collect ripe tomatoes in a large basket. Mrs. Chen spoke very little English, but she and Louis communicated perfectly through smiles and gestures. Louis would point to a red tomato and Mrs. Chen would nod and help him pick it carefully from the vine. William and Kate worked alongside the other adults, digging holes for new plants and spreading fresh soil around the growing vegetables. They were getting their hands and clothes dirty, but they did not mind at all. William found himself talking with a father named James who had been unemployed for 6 months. James explained how the garden had helped his family eat healthy food when money was tight. Kate was working next to a young mother named Sarah who had brought her baby to the garden while she worked. Sarah told Kate how the garden had become like a second family for her. When her baby got sick, the other garden members brought soup to her house. When she could not afford school supplies for her older son, the garden members collected money to help her buy what she needed. As the morning went on, the royal children became completely absorbed in their garden work. They forgot all about being royal and just enjoyed the simple pleasure of helping plants grow. Charlotte learned how to tie tomato plants to wooden stakes so they would grow tall and strong. George discovered that carrots grew underground and you had to pull them up to harvest them. Louis giggled with delight every time he found a worm in the soil. Mr. Peterson watched the royal family working with such joy and natural ease. He had been worried that they might feel uncomfortable getting dirty or doing physical work, but instead they seemed to love every minute of their time in the garden. He could see that they truly understood what the garden meant to the community. The other families working in the garden were also amazed by how normal and friendly the royal family seemed. The children played together as if they had known each other for years. The adults shared stories and advice about gardening just like neighbors always do. There was no feeling that some people were more important than others. When it was time to leave the garden, the royal children did not want to go. They had made new friends and learned so much about how food grows. Mr. Peterson gave each child a small potted plant to take home so they could start their own garden. Charlotte got a small tomato plant, George got herbs for cooking, and Louis got a tiny sunflower that would grow to be very tall. As they said goodbye to their new friends at the garden, The royal family promised to come back soon to see how all the plants were growing. The community members waved and called out thank you as the family walked back to their car. Everyone felt that they had shared something special together that morning in the simple act of growing food and caring for the earth. The final stop on the royal family's journey was the Helping Hands Family Shelter, located in a quiet part of the city. This shelter was different from others because it specifically helped families with children who had nowhere else to live. The building was old but clean, and the people who worked there made sure it felt as much like a home as possible. Kate had spent the previous evening preparing special care packages with her children's help. Each package contained warm socks, hand lotion, small snacks, and handwritten notes of encouragement. The children had worked hard to write messages like, "You are special," and "Things will get better" in their best handwriting. They had also drawn pictures of rainbows and flowers to make people smile. Mrs. Rodriguez, who managed the shelter, met them at the front door. She was a kind woman in her 50s who had been helping homeless families for over 20 years. She had seen many sad situations, but she never lost her faith that things could improve for people who were struggling. Her eyes were tired but full of warmth and hope. "We have 15 families staying with us right now," Mrs. Rodriguez explained as she led them inside. "Some have been here for just a few days, while others have been with us for several weeks. All of them are working hard to find permanent homes and jobs. What they need most is to feel that people care about them and believe in their strength." The main room of the shelter was set up like a large living room, with comfortable couches and chairs arranged in small groups. There were toys scattered around for the children and books on shelves along the walls. The smell of homemade soup was coming from the kitchen where volunteers were preparing lunch for everyone. Several families were sitting together talking quietly or reading books to their children. When the royal family entered the room, there was a moment of surprise, and then shy smiles began to appear on faces. A little boy about 5 years old peeked out from behind his mother's leg and stared at Prince Louis with curious eyes. Prince Louis, being naturally friendly, walked right over to the little boy and said hello. The boy whispered his name was Miguel, and he had been staying at the shelter with his mother and baby sister for 2 weeks. Louis sat down on the floor next to Miguel and started showing him the small toy cars he had brought to share. Princess Charlotte noticed a girl sitting alone in the corner looking very sad. The girl was about 9 years old, and she was holding a worn stuffed rabbit tightly against her chest. Charlotte walked over carefully and sat down beside her. The girl looked up with red eyes that showed she had been crying. "My name is Charlotte," the princess said gently. "What's your name?" The girl whispered that her name was Sophia, and she missed her old bedroom and her friends from school. Charlotte understood exactly how Sophia felt because she sometimes felt homesick when she had to travel away from home with her parents. Charlotte reached into her bag and pulled out one of the care packages. Inside was a small notebook with a pretty cover and some colored pencils. "Maybe you could draw pictures of your old room and your friends," she suggested. "That way you can keep them close to your heart even when you're not with them." Sophia's face brightened a little as she opened the notebook. Prince George found himself talking with a boy named Marcus who was 12 years old. Marcus was trying to act tough and pretend he didn't care about anything, but George could see that he was actually scared and worried. Marcus told George that his family had lost their apartment when his father lost his job, and they had been moving from place to place for months. George listened without judging, and then shared one of his own fears about starting at a new school the following year. He told Marcus that being brave didn't mean not being scared. It meant doing what you had to do even when you felt frightened. Marcus seemed surprised that even a prince could understand what it felt like to be worried about the future. William and Kate spent time talking with the parents who were staying at the shelter. They met a single mother named Janet who was working 2 part-time jobs while trying to find affordable housing for herself and her 3 children. They talked with a father named Robert whose construction company had closed down, leaving him without work for the first time in his adult life. Each family had their own story of how they had ended up at the shelter. Some had faced medical emergencies that used up all their savings. Others had been victims of fires or other disasters that destroyed their homes. A few had escaped from dangerous situations, and were trying to start their lives over in a safe place. What struck William and Kate most was how hard all these families were working to improve their situations. They were not asking for handouts or feeling sorry for themselves. They were using the shelter as a stepping stone to build better lives for their children. The parents were taking classes to learn new job skills. The children were keeping up with their schoolwork despite all the changes in their lives. As lunchtime approached, the royal family helped serve soup and sandwiches to everyone in the shelter. Prince Louis carefully carried small bowls of soup to the youngest children. Princess Charlotte helped distribute napkins and made sure everyone had something to drink. Prince George assisted the older children in setting up a temporary dining area. The meal became a time of sharing and laughter. The royal children sat with their new friends and talked about their favorite foods, games, and movies. The adults shared stories about their hometowns and their dreams for the future. For a little while, the shelter felt less like a place for people with problems and more like a gathering of friends enjoying time together. Mrs. Rodriguez watched everything with amazement. She had seen many visitors come to the shelter over the years. Most of them stayed for a short time, took some photos, and left quickly. But the royal family was different. They seemed genuinely interested in each person's story, and they treated everyone with respect and kindness. When it was time to leave the shelter, the royal family exchanged hugs and promises to stay in touch with the families they had met. Sophia gave Charlotte a drawing she had made of them sitting together. Miguel gave Prince Louis one of his toy cars as a thank you gift. Marcus shook hands with Prince George and said he would remember their conversation about being brave. The care packages were distributed to all the families, and the handwritten notes brought tears to many eyes. Parents read the encouraging words to their children, and several people said they would keep the notes forever as reminders that someone believed in them during their difficult time. As the royal family walked back to their car, Mrs. Rodriguez thanked them for bringing hope and joy to people who really needed both. The families waved from the windows and doorway of the shelter until the car disappeared from sight. Everyone felt that something special had happened that day in the simple act of sharing a meal and showing that all people deserve dignity and respect. As the royal family drove home from their day of community visits, something magical was already beginning to happen across the city. Word about their unexpected appearances was spreading quietly through social media and local news networks. But this was not the usual kind of royal news that focused on fancy clothes or formal ceremonies. Instead, people were sharing photos and videos that showed genuine moments of human connection. Someone had captured a picture of Princess Charlotte hugging Emma at the hospital. Another person had filmed Prince George carefully watering plants at the community garden. A third photo showed Prince Louis sharing his toy cars with Miguel at the homeless shelter. These images were touching people's hearts because they showed the royal family simply being kind, caring human beings. In the hospital photo, Charlotte looked like any little girl making a new friend. In the garden video, George appeared to be just another child learning about growing food. In the shelter picture, Louis seemed like a normal boy sharing his toys with someone who needed them. Mrs. Patterson, a grandmother who lived near the community garden, was one of the first people to share a story online. She wrote about how she had watched Prince William get his hands dirty while planting vegetables alongside neighborhood fathers. She described how natural and comfortable he seemed while talking with people about their everyday struggles and dreams. A nurse from the children's hospital posted about how Kate had quietly helped feed lunch to some of the youngest patients without any cameras or publicity. The nurse explained that Kate had asked thoughtful questions about each child's treatment and had remembered details about their families and interests. She treated each sick child like they were the most important person in the world. The father of one of the children at the garden wrote a long message about his conversation with the royal couple. He explained how William and Kate had listened to his story about being unemployed for 6 months without any judgment or pity. Instead, they had asked practical questions about his job search and had offered genuine encouragement about his efforts to provide for his family. But what was moving people most were the small details that showed the authentic character of the royal children. Videos showed Charlotte teaching Emma how to draw flowers at the hospital. Photos captured George reading quietly to Tommy, who had been sitting alone. Images revealed Louis making all the younger children at the shelter laugh during lunch. These were not grand gestures or expensive donations. They were simple acts of friendship and kindness that any child could do. Parents across the country began showing these photos to their own children and asking, "What can we do to help others in our community?" A teacher named Miss Williams saw the news about the royal family's visits and decided to talk about it with her class of 8-year-old students. She showed them the pictures and asked what they noticed about how the royal children had behaved. The students immediately pointed out that Charlotte, George, and Louis had shared their own toys and belongings with children they had just met. One student named Amy raised her hand and said they weren't acting like they were better than other kids. They were just being nice friends. Another child named Peter added, "Maybe we could visit sick kids at the hospital too and bring them some of our toys." Miss Williams realized that the royal children had provided a perfect example of how young people could make a difference in their communities. She decided to organize a class project where her students would make care packages for children at the local hospital. Within days, other teachers at the school were planning similar projects for their own classes. The story was spreading beyond London as well. Families in small towns across England were reading about the royal family's day and feeling inspired to look for ways they could help their own neighbors. A farming family in Yorkshire decided to donate fresh vegetables to their local food bank after reading about the community garden visit. A group of teenagers in Manchester organized a fundraising event for a homeless shelter in their city after seeing the photos from the royal family's shelter visit. They said they were motivated by how Prince George had treated Marcus with respect and friendship despite their different life situations. Social media was filling up with stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things for others. A bakery owner in Cornwall started giving free bread to elderly customers who were struggling financially. A group of mothers in Scotland began organizing weekly visits to a local nursing home where residents rarely had visitors. What made all of these actions special was that people were not doing them for attention or praise. They were inspired by the simple example of a family that had used their position to show genuine care for others. The royal family had demonstrated that the most powerful thing anyone could do was to treat other people with dignity, respect, and kindness. News reporters were struggling to find the right words to describe what was happening. This was not the typical story about royal duties or charity events. Instead, it was about human beings connecting with other human beings in the most basic and beautiful ways possible. One journalist wrote, "Today we witnessed something rare in our modern world. We saw people with great privilege using their advantages not to separate themselves from others, but to build bridges of understanding and compassion." The royal family reminded us that service is not about giving money or making speeches. It is about seeing the humanity in every person we meet. By evening, the hashtag #KindnessMatters was trending across social media platforms. People were sharing their own stories of small acts of kindness they had witnessed or participated in. The royal family's simple day of community service had created a wave of goodness that was spreading far beyond anything they could have imagined. Back at home, William and Kate were reading some of these online messages while their children played quietly in the next room. They were amazed and humbled by how their day had inspired so many people to take action in their own communities. They realize that sometimes the most important thing leaders can do is simply show others what caring looks like in everyday life. The power of their small gestures was proving to be much greater than any grand ceremony or formal speech could ever be. They had touched hearts by opening their own hearts to others. In doing so, they had reminded an entire nation that every person has the ability to make the world a little bit better through simple acts of love and kindness. Within just 3 days of the royal family's community visit, something remarkable was happening across the entire country. The simple acts of kindness they had shown were creating waves of positive change that reached far beyond anyone's expectations. It was as if they had thrown a small stone into a calm lake, and the ripples were spreading in all directions. At St. Mary's Children's Hospital, where the royal family had started their day, the effects were immediate and overwhelming. The hospital phone had been ringing constantly with people wanting to know how they could help. Dozens of families were calling to ask about volunteering to read stories to sick children or to donate toys and books. Sarah, the head nurse, was amazed by the response. In her 15 years at the hospital, she had never seen anything like it. A local bakery had offered to deliver fresh cookies every week. A group of retired teachers wanted to start a tutoring program for children who were missing school due to their illness. 3 different families had volunteered to adopt the hospital's small garden area and keep it beautiful year-round. But the most touching response came from other children in the community. Emma, the little girl who had become friends with Princess Charlotte, had received over 200 letters and drawings from children across London. Kids were sending her their own artwork and encouraging messages telling her to stay strong and get better soon. The community garden was experiencing its own miracle. Mr. Peterson could hardly believe what was happening to his small neighborhood project. People were showing up every day wanting to help with the gardening work. A local hardware store had donated tools and supplies. A garden center had provided free plants and seeds for expanding the growing area. More importantly, families from all over the city were asking how they could start similar gardens in their own neighborhoods. Within a week, 5 new community gardens were being planned in different parts of London. People who had never met before were working together to find vacant lots and organize planting schedules. Maria, the young girl who had taught Princess Charlotte how to plant bean seeds, had become a celebrity in her own neighborhood. Other children were asking her to teach them about gardening. Her mother was proud to see her daughter sharing her knowledge and helping others learn about growing food. The impact at the Helping Hands Family Shelter was equally extraordinary. Mrs. Rodriguez was receiving calls from people who wanted to donate everything from children's clothes to job interview supplies. A local restaurant had offered to provide free meals once a week. Several business owners had called asking if any of the shelter residents were looking for employment. But perhaps the most meaningful change was in how people in the community were now viewing homeless families. Instead of looking away or making assumptions, people were beginning to understand that these were ordinary families facing temporary difficulties. The royal family's respectful treatment of the shelter residents had opened many eyes and hearts. Sophia, the girl who had been sad about missing her old home, had received a special package from Princess Charlotte. Inside was the notebook Charlotte had promised to send, along with some of Charlotte's own drawings and a long letter about friendship. Sophia was so excited that she asked Mrs. Rodriguez to help her write a thank you letter back to the princess. Schools across the country were incorporating lessons about community service into their daily schedules. Teachers were using the royal family's example to show students how they could make a difference in their own communities. Children were organizing food drives, clothing donations, and visits to nursing homes. One elementary school in Birmingham had started a program called Royal Acts of Kindness, where students were challenged to perform one act of service each week. The children were documenting their good deeds in journals and sharing their experiences with their classmates. The program was so successful that other schools were asking for information about how to start similar initiatives. The teenage boy Marcus, whom Prince George had befriended at the shelter, had been particularly inspired by their conversation about courage. He had decided to start a support group for other young people whose families were experiencing housing difficulties. With help from Mrs. Rodriguez, he was organizing weekly meetings where teenagers could talk about their challenges and encourage each other. Local news stations were struggling to keep up with all the positive stories emerging from communities across the region. They were reporting on everything from increased volunteer applications at hospitals to new community garden projects to improve donations at homeless shelters. One reporter noted that she had never covered so many uplifting stories in such a short period of time. The economic impact was also significant. Local businesses were seeing increased customers as people were choosing to shop at stores that supported community projects. Restaurants that donated meals to shelters were receiving more business from customers who wanted to support their charitable efforts. Garden centers were selling more supplies to people starting their own community gardens. Churches and community centers were reporting higher attendance at their service projects and volunteer meetings. People who had never been involved in helping others were asking how they could get started. The royal family's example had shown that service could be simple, accessible, and deeply rewarding. Online forums and social media groups dedicated to community service were growing rapidly. People were sharing ideas for helping others and connecting with neighbors who wanted to work together on local projects. The hashtag Kindness Matters was being used thousands of times each day as people documented their own acts of service. Government officials were taking notice of the grassroots movement that was developing. Local councils were receiving requests for more community garden spaces and better support for homeless shelters. Some politicians were beginning to talk about how they could better support the kind of community initiatives that were spontaneously emerging. International news outlets were also covering the story of how one family's simple day of service had created such widespread positive change. Articles were being written about the British kindness movement and how it was inspiring similar activities in other countries. The royal family had accidentally started something much larger than they had ever imagined. But perhaps the most important change was happening in individual hearts and minds. People were beginning to see their neighbors differently. They were recognizing that everyone had something valuable to contribute to their community. They were learning that small acts of kindness could create connections that enriched everyone's lives. The royal family had shown that true leadership was not about giving orders or making grand speeches. It was about rolling up your sleeves and working alongside others to make life better for everyone. They had demonstrated that the most powerful tool for creating positive change was simply treating every person with dignity, respect, and genuine care. The ripple effect of their kindness was proving that one day of authentic service could inspire thousands of people to transform their communities. The stone they had thrown into the lake was creating waves that would continue spreading for months and years to come. 3 months had passed since the royal family's special day of community service, and the impact was still growing stronger every week. What had started as one family's simple desire to help others had become a movement that was changing communities across the entire country. The legacy of love they had created was touching more lives than anyone could have imagined. At home in their palace, the royal family had made community service a regular part of their weekly routine. Every Saturday morning, William, Kate, and their 3 children would visit a different place where help was needed. Sometimes they went back to familiar locations like the hospital, garden, or shelter. Other times, they discovered new places where their presence could make a difference. Princess Charlotte had become a pen pal with Emma from the children's hospital. The 2 girls wrote letters to each other every week, sharing stories about their daily lives and their dreams for the future. Emma's health had improved significantly, and the doctors said she would be able to go home soon. She credited her friendship with Charlotte as one of the things that had helped her stay positive during her treatment. Prince George had maintained his friendship with Marcus from the homeless shelter. Marcus and his family had found permanent housing, and Marcus was doing well in his new school. He often wrote to George about his experiences starting the support group for teenagers facing housing challenges. The group had grown to include over 30 young people from across the city. Prince Louis had learned to write simple letters, and he regularly sent drawings and notes to Miguel and the other young children he had met at the shelter. His innocent messages, filled with spelling mistakes and colorful pictures, always brought smiles to the families who were still working to rebuild their lives. The children's hospital had transformed into a place of constant activity and hope. The volunteer program that started after the royal visit now included over 100 regular helpers. The hospital had been able to create new programs, including art therapy sessions, music performances, and educational activities for long-term patients. Emma, who had finally returned home, had started a project called Art for Hearts, where recovered patients created artwork to give to children who were still in the hospital. Her friendship with Princess Charlotte had taught her that sharing creativity and kindness could help heal both the giver and the receiver. The Sunshine Community Garden had grown into a network of 15 gardens throughout London. Mr. Peterson had become something of a local celebrity as he traveled from garden to garden teaching people how to grow their own food. The original garden was now producing enough vegetables to supply 3 different food banks on a regular basis. Maria, the girl who had taught Charlotte about planting seeds, had become the youth coordinator for the garden network. At only 10 years old, she was leading workshops for other children and helping them understand how growing food could bring communities together. Her confidence and leadership skills had flourished through her involvement in the gardening movement. The Helping Hands Family Shelter had been able to expand into a larger building due to increased donations and community support. Mrs. Rodriguez had hired additional staff members and was able to help more families find permanent housing. The average stay at the shelter had decreased because more people in the community were offering job opportunities and affordable housing options. Sophia had not only returned to permanent housing, but had also started a friendship club for children who had experienced homelessness. She wanted to help other kids understand that losing your home did not mean losing your worth or your dreams. Her club met monthly and included both children who had been homeless and children from stable families who wanted to offer support and friendship. Schools across the country had adopted community service as a standard part of their curriculum. Students were required to complete service projects each semester, and many children were discovering talents and interests they never knew they had. Some students found they loved working with elderly people. Others discovered a passion for environmental projects or helping younger children with reading. The Royal Acts of Kindness program that started in Birmingham had spread to over 500 schools. Children were documenting millions of small acts of service, from helping neighbors with groceries to reading to younger siblings to cleaning up local parks. Teachers reported that students involved in the program were showing improved behavior and academic performance. Local governments had responded to the grassroots movement by creating new funding programs for community gardens, homeless shelters, and volunteer organizations. Several cities had established community kindness coordinators, whose job was to help connect people who wanted to help with organizations that needed volunteers. The business community had also embraced the movement, with many companies offering paid volunteer time for their employees and creating partnerships with local service organizations. Some businesses had started kindness competitions, where different departments competed to see who could contribute the most community service hours each month. International visitors were coming to London specifically to see the community projects that had emerged from the royal family's example. The London model of community service was being studied and replicated in cities around the world. What had started as one family's simple day of caring had become a global inspiration for grassroots kindness movements. But the most important changes were happening in individual hearts and families across the country. Parents were taking their children to volunteer at local organizations. Grandparents were sharing stories about the importance of helping others. Neighbors were getting to know each other and working together on community projects. Children who had never thought about homelessness were now understanding that families could face difficult times through no fault of their own. Kids who had been afraid of hospitals were learning that sick children were just like them and could benefit from friendship and kindness. The royal family themselves had been deeply changed by their experiences. William and Kate found that their community service work had given them a deeper understanding of the real challenges facing ordinary families. They were using this knowledge to influence policy discussions and to advocate for better support systems for vulnerable communities. The three royal children had developed empathy and awareness that would shape their characters for the rest of their lives. They no longer took their privileges for granted, and they understood that true happiness came from helping others rather than from receiving special treatment. Their teachers noticed that they were more thoughtful and caring toward their classmates. Every evening at dinner, the family would share stories about the people they had met and the projects they were supporting. These conversations had become some of their most treasured family time. The children would update their parents about letters they had received from their friends at the hospital, shelter, and garden. William and Kate would share news about policy changes or new programs that had emerged from community feedback. On the first anniversary of their special day, the royal family returned to visit the hospital, garden, and shelter where their journey had begun. They were amazed by the transformations they witnessed. The hospital playroom had been expanded and filled with donated toys, books, and art supplies. The garden had doubled in size and was feeding dozens of families each week. The shelter had helped over 200 families find permanent housing. But the most beautiful moment came when they were reunited with their original friends. Emma, now healthy and strong, had become a volunteer at the hospital herself. Marcus had started a nonprofit organization to help homeless teenagers. Maria was teaching gardening classes to adults as well as children. Sophia had written a children's book about kindness that was being published to raise money for homeless shelters. These young people had been inspired by their friendships with the royal children to become leaders and change makers in their own communities. They were proof that when people are treated with dignity and respect, they can overcome any challenge and achieve amazing things. As the royal family drove home that anniversary evening, they reflected on how much their lives had changed. They had discovered that the most meaningful way to use their royal platform was not through formal ceremonies or grand speeches, but through genuine human connections and simple acts of service. Charlotte looked out the car window and asked her parents a question that showed how much she had grown. "Do you think we will still be helping people when I am grown up and have children of my own?" Kate smiled and took her daughter's hand. "I think helping others will always be the most important thing our family does," she replied.